This study of security for the nation's surface transportation, that's subways and trains, shows some alarming vulnerabilities. It comes at the same time President Obama is revamping security for flights coming into the U.S. After the failed Christmas Day bombing attempt, the president introduced what one advisor calls a blunt instrument. Additional screening for every passenger from 14 countries, such as Afghanistan and Somalia. But the Obama administration is now scrapping that blunt instrument and replacing it with a system based on threat assessments and intelligence.
And in the days ahead, I will announce further steps to disrupt attacks, including better integration of information and enhanced passenger screening for air travel.
Whereas the no-fly list contains specific names, now airlines will be told to also look for, say, anyone with a passport stamp from a particular country, or even a partial description. It's intelligence-based instead of name-based, and it came after several months' study. A separate study that took about a year looked at security for ground transportation, trains, highways, subways, and it reached a much more unnerving conclusion. More than 8 years after 9/11, coordination among agencies and governments when it comes to threats and data about ground transportation systems, quote, is not functioning properly. Established roles and responsibilities have not been well communicated and are being disregarded. It's a frightening thought given the recent bloody subway bombings in Moscow.
Surface transportation has not received the same attention, the same priority, and the same resources as aviation security.
The report issues 20 recommendations, and some may surprise you that they need to be made at all. For instance, there is not one single agency taking the lead on all security, risk-related information on transportation systems and assets. And Robin, we should point out the Obama administration still does not have a permanent director of the TSA, of the Transportation Security Administration. Their second nominee for that post withdrew his name from consideration a week ago after questions from lawmakers about his professional dealings. Robin.
That's right, Jake, and we'll be watching you on Sunday. Thank you. But joining us now is ABC News consultant and former National Security Advisor Richard Clark. I want to talk more about this report, and a lot of people, as you know, Richard, are going to be upset about this. It concludes the nation's transportation network is at an elevated risk of attack, has been for the last 10 years. So our authorities are just asleep at the wheel here, Richard?
Well, Robin, subways and commuter rail are very hard to protect, much harder to protect than airplanes and airports, which is probably why terrorists attack them more. Around the world, terrorists have attacked subways and railroads about 20 times as often as they've attacked airplanes.
And we saw, of course, what happened in Moscow on Monday, and there are a lot of people that were saying, you know, that could very well happen here in the U.S. Is America's subway system vulnerable, as you said?
It's very vulnerable, and we're not doing enough. For example, in New York, there are over 4,000 cameras in the New York subway system, but we recently discovered about half of them don't work because there's not enough money to do the maintenance necessary to have them working properly.
Well, that's frightening when we hear something like that. And you heard in Jake's report about the 20 recommendations, and leading the way is saying that they need to designate a lead agency, and the TSA has been nominated, but of course, as Jake said, they're still looking for a leader. So where does that leave us, Richard?
Well, there's a fight between states and cities that run the subways and the federal government, and they both are pointing at each other as to who's in charge. Our hope, Robin, is that this report will put enough light on the subject that TSA can take the responsibility and increase the security on the subways that millions of Americans ride on every day.
Right. You don't want to hear when the report says it's inefficient and poorly coordinated. You have this is your expertise here, Richard. What are some of the solutions that you think should be put in place?
Well, one thing is to put in a lot of cameras and to make sure that they're running and working with the up-to-date software. Another thing is to do random searches of people. And only one city, New York City, does random searches of people entering the subway. And even New York has really reduced the amount that they're doing random searches.
And talk about why those random searches, because you're right, it would be impossible to search everyone going through the subway system here or anywhere else. Why would the random searches be effective, do you think?
Well, we hope that random searches deter terrorists, that if they think there's a chance that they may be stopped by the police on the way into the subway before they can do the attack, that they'll choose some other target or some other city. We don't have any proof of that, but you're right. You can't search everyone. You can't search 5 million people going into the New York subway every day. So you have to be selective and use intelligence.
That's right, and do something. Richard Clark, thank you so much. Have a good weekend. Appreciate you being here with us and for your insight.